The British Army has seen its fair share of heroes, victories and legendary moments. But what happens when one regiment always seems to be on the wrong side of fate? Enter the 44th Regiment of Foot, later known as the 44th East Essex Regiment. The regiment some historians believe was Britain's unluckiest. From North America to Afghanistan through 2 world wars, their story is one of bravery and, sadly, very bad luck. Formed in 1741, they were originally the 55th Regiment of Foot. But when several regiments were disbanded, the 55th were redesignated as the 44th. As the historical record of the regiment says, in the Royal Warrant of the 1st of July 1751 for ensuring uniformity in the clothing standards and colours of the army and regulating the number and rank of regiments, the facings of the 44th Regiment were directed to be yellow. It's worth noting that in some cultures yellow is considered to be bad luck. The 44th Regiment of Foot were destined for a long and eventful career in the British Army, but while, like most regiments, they earned glory and fame, the 44th also earned a different kind of reputation, one for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that didn't stop them fighting hard. Let's take a look at their story battle by battle, disaster by disaster, and see just how far bad luck can follow you. We start in 1755 during the French and Indian War in North America. The 44th were part of General Braddock's army tasked with capturing the French fort Duquesne, I think that's how you say it. But as it says in the regimental history, many unforeseen and inconceivable difficulties attended this expedition against Fort Duquesne. Major General Braddock was obliged to march his army across the Allegheny Mountains over a rugged, pathless and unknown country through unfrequented woods and dangerous defiles, setting forth the continual labour and fatigue of the soldiers who had to cut out the roads across steep mountains and rocks of an excessive height and divided by rivers and torrents. Now it seems that General Braddock wasn't the smartest commander and, according to the regimental history, pushed on through hostile territory without sending out scouts to recce the route. Surprise, surprise, they were ambushed. The Native Americans and their French allies using cover expertly. Things quickly deteriorated for the British. Quote, "The advanced guard was formed by the Grenadiers of the 44th under Brevet Lieutenant Colonel the Honourable Thomas Gage. 22 men only of their number were left standing after the first discharge. The enemy could alone be discovered by the smoke of their musket, and great confusion was created by the tumultuous pressing on and crowding of the men behind, who earnestly requested instructions how to proceed. In this emergency, several of them fell by the irregular fire of their own comrades, as was ascertained afterwards, the bullets being of a larger size than those used by the foe. By this time the 100 grenadiers were all killed save 11, 3 of whom were mortally wounded. Most of the officers and men who stood firm to the last were sacrificed to the general's further mismanagement. Instead of directing a retreat, General Braddock remained upon the spot, his obstinacy increasing with the danger, until nearly all of his men were killed or wounded. Colonel Sir Peter Halkett of the 44th was also amongst those killed. It's said that many of the wounded were abandoned and then tortured by the Native Americans. Eventually Braddock himself was killed, and a certain unknown colonel called George Washington ably led the retreat. Wonder how his career developed. Their next big battle was even more disastrous. Let's fast forward to 1758. The British were determined to capture Fort Ticonderoga in northern New York from the French. Alright Americans, I'm sure you'll tell me I said that wrong. The 44th were again right in the thick of it. Now in theory the British should have won this one. They had a massive numerical advantage with over 15,000 men against a much smaller French force. But once again poor planning and overconfidence turned the assault into a complete disaster. The 44th, along with other British units, charged straight into the French defences, which were well fortified and protected by a wall of sharpened logs. The result? A bloodbath. Nearly 2,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded, and the 44th was decimated in the attack. It was a humiliating defeat, the bloodiest day of that war. The regiment though returned to America for the Revolution, landing in Boston in 1775. It fought at the Battle of Brooklyn, the Battle of Brandywine and Germantown, and the Battle of Monmouth in June 1778. As far as I can see though, they didn't suffer any specific disasters as such. Now just quickly, many of you will be aware that I travel a lot for my day job, often to difficult and dangerous places. While there, I don't want to be like the 44th Regiment and suffer catastrophic bad luck. Therefore, one area of security I'm always focused on is the internet, and a big part of that is using a good VPN or virtual private network. A VPN encrypts your traffic and hides your IP address, making you a harder target for the hackers. And that's where today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, comes in. They use the best in-class encryption that would take a hacker with a supercomputer billions of years to crack. Now I know most of you are hard as nails, serving or former military, and are ready for anything. But did you know that public Wi-Fi, such as in hotels or malls, are a favourite way for hackers to access your personal data? They use what's called a man-in-the-middle method to get you to log on to a fake Wi-Fi. Not a good day at the office if that happens, but with ExpressVPN you're in good hands and don't need to worry. When I travel, I now use ExpressVPN. It works really well at keeping me safe from the hackers. It also allows me to change my virtual location and watch content that isn't available where I am. Switch to a US based IP address and suddenly I can stream loads more films and shows from over 50 streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney+, you know them. You can also use it to bypass local bans on apps and services such as WhatsApp. With one ExpressVPN subscription, you can protect up to 8 devices at the same time, no matter what platforms you use. And it is really easy to use. It also comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, 24/7 customer support, so it's completely risk-free. Join millions of happy users and protect your online privacy. Find out how you can get 3 months for free by clicking the link in the description box below. That's expressvpn.com/redcoathistory. In 1782, most British regiments of foot were given county designation, and this unit became the 44th brackets East Essex Regiment of Foot. Now, fast forward to the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. The 44th had the bad luck to be shipped off to the West Indies at first, always a terrible place that saw horrific casualties, mainly from disease. A second battalion was soon raised, and they fought at the Battle of Fuentes de Oñoro in 1811 and the storming of Badajoz the following year, one of the bloodiest sieges of the entire Peninsular War. Now, let's go back to the historical record of the 44th. It says, at 8 o'clock in the evening, the 5th Division under Lieutenant General Leith, of which the 44th formed part, broke up and from its bivouac, and the 2nd Brigade, composed of the 4th, 30th and 44th, alongside the 5th Cazadores, commanded by Major General Walker, formed in rear of a mill close to the southwest angle of the works, at which point it escalated, and having succeeded in gaining the walls, maintained its ground, carried the bastions to the right, obtained possession of the Las Palmas Gate, and cleared that part of the town of the enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Brooke of the 4th Regiment commanded the advance party, which consisted of the 4th King's Own, the light companies of the 30th and the 44th, and that of the 38th from the 1st Brigade of the division. After breaking through the palisading and entering the ditch, they were exposed to a murderous flanking fire of grape and musketry. Half their number fell. Now, the assault on Badajoz in 1812 has been well covered on this channel before. It turned into a brutal melee, with soldiers fighting hand to hand for control of the city. The 44th suffered massive casualties, but they helped secure a hard-fought victory against a determined and well-prepared enemy. But soon the 44th had a real turn of fortune, winning an Imperial French Eagle at the Battle of Salamanca. As it says on essexregiment.co.uk about the Battle of Salamanca in July 1812, the 44th Regiment was attached to the 5th Division, which formed the centre of the British line. As battle joined, the 44th section line of battle coincided with a small area of woodland, which meant that the two lines were only a few yards apart before each became visible. Fortunately for the British, the French line at this point was engaged in a change of formation, and the British seized advantage by firing a volley and then charging. The French line turned in confusion, at which point 2 squadrons of Dragoon Guards drove through the French lines. Lieutenant William Pearce and Privates Finlay, Murray, Blackburn and Devine of the 44th Regiment, together with Lieutenant Francis Maguire of the 4th Regiment, and Ensigns John Pratt of the 30th Regiment, surprised a group of French soldiers. Let's go back again to the historical record. It says, the French were called on to lay down their arms, about which there was some demur, but on the cavalry returning to the charge they gladly did so, craving protection. The French officer who carried the eagle had just wrenched it from the pole when Lieutenant Pearce first saw it. He was endeavouring to conceal it under his grey greatcoat which he wore over his uniform. Private, afterwards Sergeant Finlay, aided in the capture, and the French officer making resistance was assisted by one of his men, who, attacking Lieutenant Pearce with his fixed bayonet, was shot dead by Private Bill Murray of the 44th Light Company. Privates Blackburn and Devine of the same company also had a hand in this affair, and Lieutenant Pearce divided $20, all the money he had with him, amongst the 4 men for their gallant exertions. The gallantry of the 2nd 44th gained them the nickname the Little Fighting Fours. So it wasn't all bad luck for the 44th, they were clearly hard buggers and excellent soldiers. Meanwhile, the 1st Battalion was shipped off to fight in the War of 1812 against, yep, you've got it, the United States. They were part of the British force that burned Washington DC in 1814. Glorious moment. But their fortunes soon turned. At the Battle of New Orleans in 1815, the 44th were part of the British attack on the American defences. It was an attack that was a disaster. The 44th was ordered to carry ladders to help scale the American defences, but confusion reigned and the ladders were left behind. As a result, the regiment was picked apart by enemy fire with no way to get over the fortifications. As Wendell Schollander says in his excellent article about the 44th, many explanations were offered as to why the 44th had failed to place the ladders and carry out the regiment's duty that day. It's hard to know what's true. However, the commander of the regiment was found to be at fault and discharged from the army. The 44th hardly covered itself with glory in the whole affair. It was another stroke of bad luck. It was a catastrophic defeat and the 44th suffered heavy casualties once more. Though, despite what my American friends like to say in the comments, that war was clearly a draw at best for the Americans. Not the crushing victory that many of them genuinely believe just because they won this battle. The next war the regiment fought was the First Burma War of 1824-25. Now there's not much to say about this except that casualties from disease were very heavy. More bad luck. And now we come to one of the darkest chapters in the 44th's history, the First Anglo-Afghan War in 1842. After a promising start to the war, the 44th were part of the British garrison at Kabul. But things soon turned ugly and the British were forced to negotiate a withdrawal through the mountains back to India. That was a bad mistake. The retreat turned into a massacre as Afghan tribesmen ambushed the British column in the freezing winter conditions. The 44th were tasked with covering the rearguard, but they were overwhelmed. The regiment made its final stand at the village of Gandamak, where nearly every man was killed. Lieutenant Thomas Souter, though, had been protecting the regimental colour by wearing it under his sheepskin coat wrapped around him. When the Afghans overran the hill, it fell open, revealing the bright yellow silk of the colour, and this saved his life. The Afghans assumed he was an important man and took him prisoner instead of killing him. Badly wounded, Souter was stripped of all his possessions, but the colour was later returned to him, and I'm told it now hangs in the regimental chapel at Worley. William Barnes Wallen's celebrated painting of the last stand of the 44th Foot, showing a group of ragged but determined redcoats encircled behind a thin line of bayonets as the Pashtun tribesmen close in, became one of the era's most famous images and helped to define Britain's image of itself. Out of the entire army, only one European, Dr. William Bryden, actually managed to escape back to British lines. The massacre sealed the 44th's reputation as probably Britain's unluckiest regiment. And I do want to point out that they might be an unlucky regiment, but they were a damn good one, just making that clear. In 1854 they were sent to fight in the Crimean War, where they participated in the battles of Alma and Inkerman. They also took part in the siege of Sevastopol. Conditions were horrendous. Men were freezing to death in the trenches and diseases like cholera were rampant. Once again the 44th suffered heavy casualties, but they fought on, taking part in some of the most gruelling battles of the war. Sergeant W. McWhinney also earned the regiment's first VC. His citation describes numerous deeds, including his work as a sharpshooter and carrying wounded men under fire. A few short years later, August 1860, the regiment fought in China, taking part in the storming of the Taku forts. This was a really tough fight, but two of the lads earned a VC in very difficult circumstances. One of them was Lieutenant Rogers. His citation reads, "For distinguished gallantry in swimming the ditches and entering the North Taku fort by an embrasure during the assault. They were the first of the English established on the walls of the fort, which they entered in the order in which their names are here recorded, each one being assisted by the others to mount the embrasure." Sure, imagine swimming through a moat under fire. Braver men than me. In 1881, the 44th were merged with the 56th Regiment to form the new Essex Regiment. This was part of those famous Cardwell reforms. What followed was hard fighting in Sudan, the Boer War, and of course the two World Wars, and they fought like lions across the globe. Now they're represented in the modern British Army by the Royal Anglian Regiment. The traditions of the 44th and 56th Regiments of Foot are still maintained, I'm told, by C Company of the 1st Battalion, Royal Anglian Regiment. So, what can we say about the 44th East Essex? They may have been unlucky, but they were also one of the most resilient regiments in British history. From the disastrous ambush at Monongahela to the massacres of Afghanistan and through two world wars, the 44th always fought with courage, even when the odds were stacked against them. Perhaps they weren't so much unlucky as they were unbreakable, because no matter how many times they were knocked down, they always got back up. So shout out to the Victorian Military Society, by the way. I'm heavily involved with them and I think you might be interested in joining. In fact, the inspiration for today's video came from an article I read in their wonderful Soldiers of the Queen magazine, a quarterly journal that you get when you join. Just check out their website victorianmilitary.org. And of course, thanks again to today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. To keep yourself safe online, don't forget to find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description box below. That's expressvpn.com/redcoathistory. I'll be back next week with more fascinating and forgotten stories from British military history. In the meantime, I think you're going to enjoy the video that's on screen now. Alright, take care.